The real presentation is actually an Excel and Power BI better together presentation. So when I was actually talking to Chris about this, he actually asked me to speak, and I said, it always makes me nervous when I get to talk to a Power Platform group. The main reason is because Power Platform, by the very nature of it, talks about Power BI and Power Automate and flows and things like that. But it seems like Excel seems to be forgotten along the way here. And I understand some of the reasons why that is and everything else, but there's a really, really strong connection story between these products. And that's one of the things that I like to make sure that people don't forget about. So that's really what the thrust of the presentation is going to be here, is I'm going to show you where I actually don't need Power BI Desktop to do what I'm going to do today, although I do need both Excel and Power BI. Now, before I get started here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a quick intro to who I am, just in case you haven't heard of me. So I am an FCPA, FCMA. I have held my accounting designation in Canada for 20 years, which is starting to make me feel really old. I do run a little website called excelguru.ca, where I have a blog and a forum. And I'm also one of the founding partners behind skillwave.training, which is a site which is dedicated to helping people get the most out of self-service BI. And we have courses specifically on Power Query and Excel and Power BI, courses on dimensional modeling. We got a whole bunch of stuff coming up as well. I run a self-service BI bootcamp there. Matt Allington runs DAX training there. We got a bunch of stuff. But basically what we're trying to build there is the go-to hub for training self-service BI analysts to do their jobs properly and be able to extract insights from their data. So if you're interested in getting good training in this area or know someone in your organization that needs it, please point them our direction, because we'd love to help. I am a Microsoft MVP. I have been for a long time, 14 years, I think now. I've got 14 awards behind me. I've held a variety of categories here, Excel for 10 straight years. Then I switched into something called Data Platform, which is the category that actually looks after Power BI. I'm now back in Office Apps and Services, which is the category that looks after Excel these days. It's changed names, and been an MVP for a long time. The big thing here is that I've actually been doing this stuff longer than Power BI has even existed, and I've been in this since the ground floor, working with these products. I absolutely love working with the Microsoft stack of products and getting information out of data. I started life as an accountant, but now, I'm a trainer, I'm an analyst, I'm a lot of different things, including a programmer, actually, and an author. I actually have a software that you are going to see a brief appearance from today called Monkey Tools, which is an add-in for Excel to make your life a little bit easier in certain cases. Now, I should mention on this that I actually did see that Uzar is coming up with how to create a calendar or date table dimension in Power BI using Power Query. And I hate to do this to anybody, but I'm going to see if I can do it way faster than what he can in Excel. So because it takes me about 35 seconds. But that's because I'm actually using a tool to automate probably some of the stuff that he's going to show you. So I wish I could do it in Power BI, I just unfortunately can't. So at any rate, I'm sure what he's got is going to be awesome, and it's probably runs on a similar line to the way I actually approach things here. Now, let's talk, before we jump into this thing, a little bit about one of the real pain points that frustrate me a lot here is I actually get a lot of calls from organizations, and they actually want Power BI training. And we have some good conversations around it. And then usually what we end up doing is we end up going back and talking about doing a little bit more holistic training them how to use both Excel and Power BI together. And one of the things that we've come to the end of this, when we sort of talk to people about this, they say, well, IT has said that they don't want us to use Excel anymore. They really want us to go and use Power BI. Power BI is going to solve all the problems that Excel has and whatnot. So that'd be a really good idea to come back and just sort of preface this off with why, and I'm going to caveat this with some IT pros, hate the Excel product and want to see it disappear. So the deal is that we can sort of break this into a couple little facets to this thing. The first and most important issue is when you're dealing with Excel, the data lives inside the actual file. When you pull all of your data into Excel, it gets sucked into the Excel file, it lives inside the Excel file, and that can very easily lead to data leakage if you save the file and email it out the door. The big issue that we have here is there is no chain of custody over this either. Once it's gone, it's gone. There's no ability to revoke access or anything like that. And people sort of see Excel as the wild, wild west of data sharing. This is a big, big issue in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's some serious problems around this. I mean, there's no audit trails for the way that data is actually handled. There's no ability to hold on to it. Once it's in that file, it gets emailed out the door. You know, you got issues there in a big way. I cannot even begin to tell you how many CEOs' salaries I've seen for companies that I've never worked for because somebody asked me for help with a pivot table. And that kind of stuff should never, ever happen. Now, I love Excel in a massive way, but the real issue that we have here is that people don't understand what's in their file and don't correctly protect the data assets that they're actually dealing with. And this is one of the things that IT pros definitely hate about Excel is once it gets in there, they have no idea where it's going to go. And their job, obviously, is to help not only serve up data for you, but it's also to protect the assets of the corporation in a digital nature. When it then comes to working with users, one of the things that I actually run, I had a really good conversation a little while ago. I was at a SQL Saturday, so it's obviously about a year ago now. But I ended up having a really good conversation with a guy, and he was asking me what I was doing. I said, I train Excel users. And he went off. He's like, man, you're going to like train them to stop doing all this stuff. I'm like, well, wait, why? And he says, there's a whole bunch of different things here, but it drove him crazy that these Excel users were going out and they weren't accepting anything that IT gave them. We've all done all this work. We know it's the truth. And these people, they take it and they go and they build all their own data and they come up with all different versions and none of it's right and curated. I'm like, okay. He says, and then can you like train them to stop putting everything in a pivot table? And I'm like, no, dude, I'm sorry, I can't do that. As a matter of fact, I actually teach them how to build a proper dimensional model so they can build a good pivot table for this stuff. And he completely lost it. This was not good and whatnot. And it was really interesting because this is one of the challenges with this guy. He was quite hostile to his end users. And I'm not going to say that all IT pros are like this, but I've met an awful lot of people that work in an accounting field and in a data analysis role that have a very, very love-hate relationship with their IT. They love to hate them is basically the way it goes because they can't get what they need from them. And this is indicative of organizations who either have forgotten or don't realize or feel it's too much of a hassle to actually serve up the true purpose of a self-service business intelligence solution. And the whole purpose of doing what we do here is to actually help people build the stuff that is not in the organization's warehouse of data reports that are prepared. It's when your boss asks you for something ridiculously stupid and you have to go and actually build it, and IT doesn't have a report for that. And IT gets friction from that because they don't want to have to support this kind of stuff. The end user's frustrated because their boss asked them for something that they really don't want to build anyway, but they kind of have to. And this is where a lot of this stuff sort of, goes and ends up becoming an issue. Now, the thing is that it's the evolution of this in Excel and building in all of this problem with these things to solve the boss's crazy nut, whatever, they're leading to this hostility. And this is what's also leading to where we get organizations that come and say IT doesn't want us to use Excel anymore, even though it's the proper tool for solving a lot of these particular problems. So what we see at that point is that people come in and they say, look, you shouldn't be using Excel. You should be using these other products. You should use Domo, Click, Tableau, or Power BI. The thing, though, is that Power BI is not intended to be an Excel killer. Kill Excel projects have existed forever in all kinds of organizations. People point out all the problems with Excel. It's super sexy to disparage the abilities that Excel actually has. But the thing that we got to remember is that the point of Power BI is actually not to kill Excel at all. If you actually think about it, you go back to what's the root issue that we have with Excel, it's all about sharing and security. The data is inside the file, and it can easily be leaked somewhere else. So how do we fix that? And the answer is you can fix it today if you got a Power BI Pro license. You just distribute your Excel files with Power BI. And that's actually what I'm going to show you a little bit of how we can actually deal with that today is being able to take an Excel model, publish it to Power BI. And I'm not going to go through the sharing process, but if you work with Power BI, you'll sort of get the idea of where this actually goes. And I think that one of the things that hopefully you'll recognize by the end of this is that where you run into somebody who's trying to actually sell their services as a get rid of Excel and go to Power BI, they're actually doing their client a huge disservice. And one of the things that I've actually found with a lot of my clients is that, I had one client that approached me a while ago, and they said, look, we need to do Power BI training. We've got this this thing. IT brought us this Power BI product. They said we need to use this to get rid of Excel. So we had them build us some reports, but now we don't trust the Power BI reports. We don't know what's in there. There's too many of them. We can't figure out what's going on. I'm like, wow, this sounds kind of like all the reasons why you were supposed to move away from Excel is because you didn't trust the data and there were too many reports and nobody knew what was going on. Why don't I teach you how to build the models in Excel, understand what happens with Power Query and Power Pivot, and then you'll understand both your Excel and your Power BI infrastructure, and you can re-envision the process and figure out what the best tool is for the right job. And at that point, everything was awesome. We spent 5 days working with these guys, and they built some amazing solutions, and they're still super happy because they're now being able to choose what they actually need. And this is the big message that I want to make sure people get is it's not an either-or world with this stuff. Power BI and Excel have different strengths. Power BI and Excel have different weaknesses. Just like you don't use a hammer to put in a screw, and you don't use a screwdriver to put in a nail, the same thing. We want to pick the right tool for the right job here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to go and step into a demo of actually doing something inside Excel that I would not try and do inside Power BI. And basically, where I'm going to start here is I'm going to go and start with this little data model file called, well, it's named Who Needs Power BI. Again, I'm not a huge believer in Who Needs Power BI, but I don't need Power BI Desktop in a lot of cases for what I do. So here we go. I have a very simple set of data here. I've got a nice little set of sales here, sales records. I've got some budgets. I've got some categories. This is a nice, easy one. And I'm going to cheat to go along with this one here because I've only got so much time. So I'm actually going to make a little bit of use of my tool here called Monkey Tools inside Excel. But one of the things I do want to point out to you as we go along here is that what my tool does is automate the process of doing stuff that I do with Excel and Power BI. So everything I'm going to do, you can do manually. It just takes longer. So that's the sort of general gist of this one here. So first thing, let me pop open the query pane.
Hey, Ken, I'm just gonna interrupt. I believe Hanaya has a question.
Okay. Now.
Sorry, it wasn't a question. I just can't see the screen. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or I'm the only one that can't see.
Is anybody else having an issue seeing the screen? If you could put your hand up. You've seen a couple of people are having some issues.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's try this then. Let me stop sharing, and then let me start sharing again, because I did switch to. How about that? Is that better for you guys?
I'm able to see the screen, but Hanaya, can you still see it?
I can. Maybe I'll try logging out and log back in.
Perfect.
All right. I hate it when that happens. Screen sharing is always the fun part, isn't it? All right. So here's the deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this. This is my basic copy here of this one. So I'm going to go and I'm going to save this under the name Calgary UG, just so that I've got a completely sort of good place to start from on this guy here. That way I don't overwrite my original file. Now, what I actually have here is I've got 3 or 6 very simple queries that are actually being used to pull this data into the Power Pivot data model. These queries are, when I say simple, I'm just going to go and edit this raw data for budget. It's going to be pulling from that blue budget table here. You're going to see that this one here has a grand total of 1 step. It is the source step that is pulling things in. I then reference that and actually pull it into my budget table, and I'm setting my data type here. And then this is loading to the data model. I always, when I'm building data here, whether it's in Excel or in Power BI, I always separate my raw data from what goes into the actual data model itself. And that way it gives me the ability to go and actually make changes along the way should I need to do so without compromising the original data source. This is a pretty simple query chain that we've got going on. 3 tables being loaded into the data model. Okay, so if you've worked with Power BI or if you've worked with Power Query in Excel, you'll recognize that basically that's the same tool there. I'm loading into the Power Pivot data model here. This is basically the same as the data model inside Power BI. We can see that I've got my 3 tables that have been loaded in here. And if I go and take a look at my diagram view, you'll see that we got a very simple data model right now with category that's being linked between the categories table and the budgets table here. Now, I'm missing a couple of components that I need in order to be able to build the solution that I'm actually looking to do. And what I'm dealing with here is I've got a little restaurant that's in Vancouver. It's fictitious data, and I need to go and build myself a budget for 2020. That's what my job is as an accountant here. So let's start by doing this. The first thing I need is a calendar table. Now, Uzor is going to show you how to build one of these things on the fly. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use my tool here. This is Monkey Tools, which opened up on the wrong window. Let me bring it over. So what we have here is we have a little calendar generator that can create different kinds of calendars. So 445, 454, 13 month. I'm going to go with the standard 12. You can use non-standard year ends. I'm just going to keep this nice and simple. And I'm going to say I'd like my earliest date to always be pulled from the date column of my sales table, which is loaded to the data model. And my latest date is going to come from my budgets table. I'm going to click Next. At this point, it lets me choose the columns I want. If you pick a 445, there's going to be a whole bunch more choices here, but for a regular calendar table, this is going to work just nicely. It says, do you want to set up these relationships for the table for you? I'm going to say, absolutely. I'm going to click Create. And this is going to go through. It's actually creating, it's already created a start date and end date query. These two guys here give me the first date and the last date of the calendar. It then creates the calendar that gives me the daily granularity of everything in between that I need for a proper calendar table. And it's now loading to the data model itself. There we are, 730 rows are done. The next thing I'm going to need is I'm going to need a couple of measures. I need a nice little measure to sum the amount column here and sum the amount column here. And I'm going to call them some like super complicated names like budget and sales. I'm going to cheat on this one too. I'm going to use this little monkey measure builder over here to go and build a couple of measures for this. So I'm going to go next. I'm going to build myself a nice little budget dollars here, and then I'm going to build myself a sales dollar here. These are basically just simply creating a sum of budget amount and sum of sales amount. It just lets me create things nice and simple. Boom, done. Those measures are ready to be used. Just have to do a couple things to my data model. Go back into Manage Data Model, come over to Diagram View. You'll notice my calendar table is here, linked by the dates. Okay, so I'm just going to go, you'll also notice that my measures are here, stored on my individual tables. So I'm just going to go through here, right click, hide these columns because I don't want to use them. Hide these columns, I don't want to use them. Then I'm going to go back to my data view, calendar, and I'm just going to do a little sort of my month names to sort them in numeric order. I kind of wish I could automate doing this part, but unfortunately Excel doesn't give me the ability to do this. All right, there we go. My data model is all set up and ready to be used. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and I'm just going to validate the data here real quick. So here we are. We're going to go insert a pivot table from the data model. And I'm going to go for my categories table. We'll put class and category on rows. I'm going to throw my sales and my budget onto my table there. So that looks good. And then I think what I'm going to do for my calendar table is I'll just throw years on values. All right. And there we go. So I built myself a nice, simple little pivot table. This data, just for reference, could be coming from anywhere. It could be coming from files, could be coming from SQL, doesn't really matter. I'm just using a pivot table to go and summarize up what I'm looking for based on a data model. Could do this in Power BI Desktop, could do it here. So happy with the way this looks, but now what my job is to go and build a 2020 budget. And this is where I think Excel has some incredible flexibility, is being able to build not only a structured set of data here, but to go into a less structured set of data. So I'm going to use some of the tools in Excel to do this. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to go back and create myself another pivot table. This one's going to look just a little bit different though. So what I'm going to do is go to categories. I'm going to put my category on rows, and I'm going to put my sales on values here. And actually, no, that'll work just fine. I'm going to go and throw my year onto columns. And then I'm going to look at it and go, that's not at all where I meant to put it. I meant to go up here, and I'll put my month short on columns. There we go. That's a little bit better. I'm starting to lay out the framework that I'm actually after. But here's the deal. This is very rectangular, and the problem is that I need to actually be able to start changing values based on what's here. I want to drill into 2019, but I want to actually use formulas to actually generate my budget for 2020. And I'd also like this to be dynamic in future years if I want to build something up. So I'd like to lay this out and deal with one product at a time. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build myself a better structure for it. I'm going to convert my pivot table to OLAP formulas, including the report filters here, because at this point, everything's still going to work, but now I can go and start hacking this thing apart the way that I want to use it. So I'm going to come up here in A4, and I'm going to create myself, this is going to be my sales base year, which is going to be 2019. And I'm going to take these little values here and paste them as values. And I'm going to take these guys here and paste them as values as well. I'm going to get rid of this last row because I don't need it. And I'm going to get rid of these grand totals over here, and I'm going to use an alt equals to do a cross sum. So that alt equals just puts in a sum function that runs across these guys here. And we'll format it to look a little bit nicer. All right. Now, at this point, I've got a framework started for this. But the thing is when you convert everything into a cube value formulas or cube formulas, at this point, there's things that are linked all over the place. And I want to actually sort of flatten this down a little bit more. So when I take a look at this formula, I can see that it's hard-coded to 2019. So I'm going to actually take this one, close off my quotes. I'm going to say and, we'll pick up regular old 2019 and quote. And when I hit enter, we'll notice that this still returns 2019. So I've now got a dynamic formula that pulls from here. So this is good. I'm going to take that, Control C. I'm going to come down to all these formulas over here, and then just expand my formula bar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press some Alt Enters in here to break my cube values onto different lines. Oops, didn't mean to do that kind of an Alt. There we go, and there we are. The blue cell, C7 here, that was my original cube formula. So I'm going to go paste that in with a cube member. We now are no longer relying on this cell. Perfect. What else was in here? So if I go back, actually, hang on a second. Let me just make sure that I commit that across all of these cells. And we got an NA in there. I know what I did. Let me just go and press Control Z on this because I don't actually want to have that happen. I needed to lock this down as absolute. That's quite important. When I now hit Control Enter, no more errors. Everything looks exactly the same. I'd like to try and self-validate as I go through and deal with these things. All right. Next one, there's a red cell with sales. Let's go take a look at that. Everything here looks hard-coded. I can keep that. So I'm going to come across here, come back in. That's going to be this one. Control V, Control Enter. There we go. Beautiful. It writes all those guys in. Let's look at our dates here. This one is using Jan. So I'm going to go and say, close quotes, and let's try and be a little bit smarter here and lock this into an absolute row this time. Close the quotes. We'll hit Control Enter. Everything looks the same. That's good. That means that formula validated across. I'm going to copy that. Come back in here. Excellent. So this is the purple one. Control V, Control Enter. There we are. So that looks pretty good. And now the last one that I'm going to do here is this for my beer. We're going to say and. We'll grab beer and close my quotes. Control Enter. That one still looks good. Excellent. So I can grab this, although I'm going to watch this real carefully. Let's get this to be absolute. We'll try not to make the same mistake twice. And here we go, Control C. And we'll go and set this one up here. Awesome. So what I've done is I've basically sort of flattened all these formulas down to get rid of the reliance that was on all these cube member formulas that are in here. And this is cool because I can now go and delete these rows, and I can wipe this out. And basically what I've done is I've essentially converted my entire formula setup or my entire pivot table to run on a formula setup. So I can come back now and say, look, I want this to be 2018. It'll recalculate, and 2019, and away we go. Okay, so that looks good so far. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this and I'm going to say, all right, let me build this into the structure that I think of as an accountant when I'm trying to go through and work with this. So here's the deal. I've got an assumption that I want to work with in this case that I'm going to do a global increase year over year on my sales. So every year I assume that I'm going to increase by 2.5%. Call that inflation. Call it whatever you like. And I'm going to color these green because those are my data input cells. Let me just go and shrink these down a little bit more. There we go. Now, my first column here, this is going to be my forecast for. And what I now need to do is I need to come up with a proper header that has the year on it. So I'm going to use this fun little function, one of my favorites in accounting, called EO month. And the EO month, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into this one here, and I'm going to create myself a new month, which is based on January. We're going to go and lock that in. And quote space 1 comma space quote. And we'll lock that guy down to absolute. So what this is building is a formula that's going to say January space 1 comma space 2019. And I'm going to up that one to say, give me the end of the month, 12 months from now. And at that point, you'll see that we get to January 31st, 2020, as you can plainly see by the date serial number 43,861. So I'll convert that into a format that's a little more readable. There we are, 2020, 0131. And now I should be able to copy this all the way across, expand these columns, and there we go. This is now dynamically driving off of this cell and these guys here. I can come back here and put in a nice little total header, and then I think I'm just going to go and I'll make this a little bit prettier. So we'll go and set this one up. Let's put it in blue. Fabulous. There we go. Awesome. All right. So that gives me my original sales here. So I'm just going to go and expand this one a little bit. We'll put in a few more rows. I'm going to make this one a little bit longer. I should probably actually tell people what this is. So I'm going to say this is going to be equal to this and sales. And it looks like I forgot my and. Excel works a lot better when you actually tell it to do the right thing. There we are. So that's that's just sales. That didn't work very well at all. Let's try that one more time. Before sales. Excellent, excellent. There we go. 2019 sales. Awesome. So now I'm going to set up the framework to allow myself to do the adjustments that I'm looking for. So here we go. We're going to go percent change. This is going to be my global change. I'm going to have an override in this particular case, so I can do individual lines. Then this will be the actual I used. And then finally, I'm going to say this cell +1 and forecast. This is going to create my 2020 forecast. I'm just going to indent these a little bit. We're going to go and put this on because these ones here are going to be data entry cells as well. I'm going to use the same color. There we are. And now I'm going to flush this one out. So my standard are 2.5%. My actual is going to be based on this. If this cell equals nothing, then we're going to go with the global. Otherwise, we're going to go with the override. And I'm going to go and hit, actually, I'm going to do, see, nope, that'll actually work. There we are. So that looks good, except the formatting doesn't. So let's fix that. Percentage. There we are. And I'm going to write a nice little average function that goes across here because I don't want to sum these. And of course, roll this down. At this point, we're going to see a little bit of a problem. When you try and average a whole bunch of blank cells, it gives me a divide by zero error. So I'm just going to hack this one through the fast way and use an if error statement to get rid of it. I wouldn't necessarily always use if error. I find that's a little bit blunt, but overall, this will work nicely. So there we go. We've got a nice little actual thing here that will allow me to change my forecast should I want to do so. And then finally, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write myself a nice little function that looks like this. It's going to have an if error, and then we're going to use an M round. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to round C7 times 1 plus the percentage here. And we're going to close that off, and we're going to M round that to the closest $1,000. And if it returns an error, we're going to put in a 0 instead. So at that point, that looks pretty good. There we are. And finally, I don't want to M round against my averages, so I'm going to say Alt equals and sum these guys across here. There we go, $858,000 for my 2020 forecast for my beer sales. And at this point, I now have the ability to take the framework that I've actually built here. I'm going to copy these rows here, Control C. We're going to go and insert copied cells here. I'm going to Control C again. insert copied cells from my other, Control C. I'll just paste these down the bottom. So I've now turned my pivot table into a budget worksheet. Okay, I would not want to try and do something like this in Power BI. This would just be a nightmare. Now, we can create ourselves a separate table to say what global change would you like, what kind of override would you like, but it's not going to be really conducive for data entry from a user point of view. You're going to have to go into the query editor. I don't know, it's ugly. This is nice and logical. From an accountant, they'll understand how to use this. We can highlight the data inputs in green. I can work with this. All right. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to make my adjustments. The first thing I look at is $88,000. It seems like it might be a bit of a tall order. I'm going to decrease this one by 4.5%, take it down to about 82,000. This one here, I'm going to increase by about 14%, bring it up to about 82,000. And of course, we've also got the tools in this thing here. If we wanted to do it, we could go and use what-if analysis and do goal seek to get the individual components into the right areas. Nice and simple. I'm not going to do that right now, but I am going to look at all of these guys. This other category, which doesn't bring me a ton of stuff, I don't ever want to see a budget for this. Those are all sort of bonus things. So I'm going to put in minus 100 away across the board. There we go. I've built what I need for my 2020 budget. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and add my 2020 budget to my 2019 budget. So to do this, I need to pull this data into Power Query. Now, I can't just go and select everything and go from table because it tries to put a table on it. That would actually blast out a bunch of formulas, put on formatting, don't want any of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a nice little named range here called range forecast. So I select the cells, I'm just typing in the name box, enter. Alternately, if you prefer, you can always do that through the name manager over here to create your range forecast here. Once we have that set up, when we now go from table, it just pulls it directly into Power Query, doesn't try and put a table on it, nice and simple. And now I can actually use Power Query to reshape the data. And the real benefit of this is that even though the data is not tabular structured to begin with, it's still got enough of a tabular format that I can come in and actually clean it up with Power Query. So we're going to go fill down. That looks good. We'll use first row as headers because I want this to work next year. I need to delete all these headers that hard code their types, so we'll get rid of that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter to only the rows that contain the word forecast, because this will dynamically update to 2021 next year, so I don't want to filter just to 2020 forecast. So there we are, down to just the 2020 forecast now, but notice filtered to only forecast. I'm now going to go and delete this column because I don't actually need it. Scroll across to the right, grab my total, get rid of that too. We're going to right-click on our forecast 4. We're going to go and say unpivot other columns. Boom, we got what we need. So now we can rename this. This is going to be category. Here we are. This one here is going to be date. Here is going to be amount. The trick with this is that these column names are going to be consistent with the column names in budget, although the order doesn't matter. I'm going to rename my query to just call it forecast. And then I'm going to do a little bit of stuff here. We're going to change these, detect the data types. We'll set that one up. Now, interesting thing, I don't like date times, but unfortunately, I can't do this because if I replace this, it actually gives an error. You can't convert from a date time directly to a date if it's text to begin with. So I'm going to delete that, press Control, oh, there you go, let's try this again, Control A, select all the columns. We'll reselect the data type again. But this time, I'm going to change this to a date by adding a new step. If you go from text to date time and then to date as a new step, it'll work nicely. Perfect. My forecast is now set up for 2020. I'm just going to do a little housekeeping here. This is a raw data connection. My start and end date, I'm going to put into my staging queries. My calendar, I'm going to throw up in here. None of that was necessary. It's just, you know, it's an accountant thing, kind of particular about that kind of stuff. And now I'm going to go to budget. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to append queries, and we're going to append my forecast to my budget table. And now I've just added my 2020 budget to my 2018 and 19 that already exist. I'm going to say OK. And what we'll see is that budget will start to do a reload here, which is good. It's waiting for other data model queries. It's actually lying. So when I go over now to sheet 1, we can see that we now have our budget has been added to the pivot table. The only problem, it doesn't know about the year. And the issue that we have here is that the end date query that drives my calendar is actually based off of the budget table and only the budget refreshed. So I just need to force a new refresh on this one in order to get the calendar to refresh as well. Typically with this thing, every time we go and we do a publish, we're going to do a full refresh anyway. All right, so it is loading, and boom, there we go. We have a nice 2020 budget is all set up, ready to go. So this is cool. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to do a nice little save on this. I love it when that happens. All right, so here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to go and save this one as Catch-up 1. Yes, I'll replace that, and then I'm going to go back and do a Save As my original file again. Every now and then, Excel likes to play silly games like this. But not a big deal. It's just weirdness that you get used to when you work with Excel. This is another reason why some Power BI people actually don't like Excel, is because Excel has a heck of a lot more code behind it and is sometimes fragile with certain things. So anyway, once you know, it's not so bad. Okay, we've saved it. It's good. Now the big thing is I've validated this stuff here. I'm happy with what it looks like. I've gone in, I've built my budgets. I'm happy with the way that looks. Now I want to go and share it with my boss. Typically what happens at this point in time in the Excel world is somebody goes and says, I'm going to attach it to email and sends it out the door. All the data is in file, and that is where our big problem comes in. So let's see what we can do to do this better. So I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Publish. And what you'll notice is that I have the option right from Excel to publish to Power BI. And there's two options here. There's Export and Upload. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to do an export. I'm actually going to do both of them, but I'm going to let this one cook. So this guy is now publishing out to Power BI. And what's happening is it's actually taking all of the Power Queries and all of the data model, the relationships, the DAX, all of that is getting published to Power BI just as if you were publishing it from Power BI Desktop. So that whole title about why do you need Power BI Desktop, you're going to see here, is actually somewhat true in certain cases. So it's now in Power BI. I'm not going to go here yet, though, because I also want to go and do a publish, and I'd like to click the upload button and show you what the difference is between these guys here. So we have two different methods of getting your workbook to Power BI. So here we go. We're doing a nice little upload. And I'm just going to wait for this one to cook here before it goes. Awesome. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my Go to Power BI. Now, while that's working, I'm actually going to go back to this document and I'm going to say File, Close. It is a very good idea to save the document before you're doing your publish. That way you actually get everything that you're expecting on the other side. It's also a good idea to close the document when you're done, and there's a reason for that. So let me just go and log into my Power BI portal here. And hopefully what we're looking at here is Excel Online that shows me everything. And what you can see here is this is actually an old version of this file from my testing that I was working on beforehand. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and kick off a refresh on this guy right now. And I'm going to let my refresh actually cook. It looks like it seems to think that it's actually updated to the right time now. So let me go and take a look and see if it's going to play nice. There we are. That's better. Okay, so I've actually published and deleted this thing about 5 times in the last 4 hours as I was tweaking it and practicing it. So sometimes we get a caching thing that's going in here. But what I want you to recognize here is this is the upload from Excel. I got a worksheet grid. It's got a pivot table. And I can see some of the fields, but not all of them. This is a bug that's going on this guy here, but okay. The pivot table frame is actually there. I need to report this one to Microsoft. The idea here is that you can keep on adding and changing your pivot table if you want to when you're looking at this. If I go over to sheet 2, I can see my entire sort of budget forecast stuff is out here. And if I want to, at this point in time, I could actually take this whole thing and I could go and pin this to a dashboard, and then I could share this workbook via Power BI with somebody else. This is a much better way than sending email because they can't necessarily download the original workbook. Much better. So that whole problem with releasing it to the wild, wild west and losing your chain of custody, you have the ability to take control of that using Power BI if you publish your Excel to your Power BI model. All right. Now, the other side of it is let's go and look at this one. Because this data set, there's only one of these, and it's not tied to the one that we saw before. This is a separate thing. You'll notice that it also has been published right about now, my time. I'm going to go and create a report here. So if I go and create a report, I get brought in here. I'm going to say, okay, cool. So let's go and let's create a little report. I think I'm going to grab my sales here. I'm going to put this on line values. I'll go and put my budget on column values. I'm going to take my calendar and let me put the, let's do month end on the shared axis. And at this point, we can now see, oh, hang on a second. Let me do a refresh on this because this is actually using old data as well, I believe. Let me just go back from this one here. I need to go back. You know, if there's one thing that I absolutely hate when I'm working with stuff that's based on the web, it is caching. I know it's helped or supposed to help me make my life easier, but I just get so wound up in getting old data on my hands that it's very frustrating. If you're scheduling a refresh on this kind of stuff, which you can do with a data set like this, at that point, this kind of stuff doesn't generally happen. I'm now at 3:21, which is my exact clock time. That's what I should have been looking for. Let's go create a report on this one here. All right, so let's try this again. Sales, we're going to go in with line values. The other lesson to be learned from this is never practice with the exact same name as what you're going to do in your demo, and then that won't happen to you as well. You should probably know better. Shared axis month ends. That still looks like it's running some older data. That does not look right to me. Hit refresh. There we are. That's better. Okay, cool. So I've now got a nice little chart that's showing me my sales. I can see my 2020 forecast is out here as well. Let's go through a little slicer on this. So I'm going to put my slicer up in the top corner. I think I'm going to add a year to my slicer, and I can now drill this in to say, okay, let's look at 2019, see what our trend was. Let's look at the 2020 budget. Hey, boss, here's what I've put together for the 2020 budget. Nice. And then, you know what? One of the really cool things about working with Power BI and Power BI Desktop, stuff that you just don't get in Excel, Q&A, right? But here's the cool thing. You don't have to be in Power BI Desktop to get this either. You can actually get this right in the client online. So I can actually build this little visual, and I can now go and say, awesome, let's go and save this and give me a report called Calgary EG. Save. Bingo. So this is pretty cool. I've now prepared my budget. I've actually put out a slicer on this. Of course, I can actually pin this so I can share the Power BI dashboard report from here. I can pin this to dashboards, do what I want with it. I can even go back to my original data setup over here, and I can even schedule a refresh for this. That's pretty awesome, all based on an Excel model. It's never touched Power BI Desktop at all. But what happens in the future? Because now, of course, it's 2020, and we all know how much fun 2020 has been to live through. 2020 happens. Let's get some sales. We're going to go and grab this for our little restaurant in Vancouver, and we're going to go all the way up to the sales for March 16th. This is a very, very important day in the history of the Vancouver restaurant because March 17th, British Columbia went into its COVID lockdown. And the restaurants all had to close, and these guys couldn't sell anymore. So, boom, we're going to add this data to our data model. We're going to come back over here, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go and hit refresh all. So I'm just going to let this go through and do its refresh. We're waiting for some sales to show up over here, and once those sales show up, we can move on to our sort of next little area here to take a look at. So there it is. Boom, everything's updated quite nicely. But obviously, at this point in time, we're not going to achieve our budget for this year. There's no way. Let's go take a look. So I'm going to come over here, going to insert a new pivot table from the data model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, let's put a filter on this one right off the bat, and we'll filter this guy here to just 2020. So there we are. And we're going to go and put from our month end right on rows, and then from our calendar, here's our sales, and here's our budget. So we can see we were actually ticking along not too bad compared to budget for January and February. And then in March, something went sideways. And, we were obviously cruising along, but then, as I say, March 16th, last day, boom, everything shuts down, restaurant's not running. And at this point, the boss comes back and says, look, we need to reforecast the budget. I need to be able to actually look at what's going on. There's no way we're going to achieve this. It's a total new world. We don't usually rebudget, but we better do it this year. Okay. So we come back over here and we say, all right, so what's this going to look like? Again, this is where I like doing my work in Excel, because when I'm looking at this, I know intrinsically as an accountant what I need to do with this. I'm not going to change March's budget. March happened. It was horrible. All good. But what I am going to say is, guess what? April and May, completely shut down. No operations whatsoever. We started to reopen here in June and July, and we figured that our revenues are going to be down 75%. People are nervous. They're not coming in. We're not set up to work with things like Uber Eats and Grubhub and DoorDash and all these different services. So business is way down. We're doing takeout orders only. And then maybe we try and bring some of these guys online. So we actually, claw our way back to minus 50%. And we're optimistically hoping that for November and December, we might make it all the way back up to 40% less than what our sales were for last year. I better go and copy this, Control C. We'll go and put this across all of our business lines. It's interesting because I can tell you right now that even this is a little optimistic, right? My beer sales, there's no way I'm going to be achieving these kind of numbers. My burgers, maybe. But the alcohol, even though people are wanting to drink over this thing, you're not going to be taking your takeout from my restaurant. They're probably getting it for someone else. But whatever, let's put this in for a starting point. So let's come back. Now remember, that feeds into Power Query, which feeds my budget table. So I should be able to see some changes here when I now come back and say refresh all. So we'll let this one cook and see what happens. And it's going, it's doing its thing, and boom, there we go. The budget's now been reforecasted. I'm good with that. So here's the most important thing that needs to happen at this point in time. The file needs to save. It is saving here. I can see it. I'm going to force it. I'm going to click save on it. I actually have auto save turned on the workbook. I can now see that it is saved. That's a good thing. I now want to go back and see what's going on, because here's something interesting. Of course, I want to update it. Now, with Power BI Desktop, if you want to update what you have, what do? Well, you go back and you republish. Well, here's the thing. When you try this with Excel, you go publish, and you say, great, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go export to Power BI. What happens is it actually comes back and it says, hang on a second, you can't do this. It already exists. You go, wait a minute. So is this like a one-time only thing? I'm stuck with my old data? And the answer to that is no. This cool thing is this is actually stored in Office 365 on SharePoint Online. So I'm going to close the file. Again, this is very important. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back over to Power BI. Now, again, normally I would sort of schedule a refresh here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the refresh now, and I'm going to let this thing go through and do its refresh. I'm also going to hop over here to the Calgary UG Excel workbook here, which was last updated at 3/18. I'm going to click on this one to refresh now as well. You'll notice you can schedule a refresh to update this from SharePoint as well, but I'm just going to kick this one off, and we'll let this one go and do its thing. That's giving me the correct timestamp now. Fingers crossed that it's not going to cache and do the things that I don't want it to, but if I go and take a look at it at this point in time, what I'm hoping is that I'll see my new pivot table that actually has the revised budget here. So at this point, I might want to take this and say, okay, I'm going to take that and pin this thing to a dashboard here. I think I'm going to put it on a new one. We'll call it Calgary UG, and pin that so that I can share that with my boss to let them know that I've actually really updated this particular dashboard. Now, I'll come back over here. Let's go look at our data set. We'll come back into, actually, sorry, not the data set. I need to go to the report. We'll go to the report for Calgary UG here. And what I should hopefully see is that when I refresh this, because it obviously has got something cached, my sales have come in and my budget is now there. I still have the ability in here to do things like analyze and explain the increases and decreases and things like that. So all of that richness that I get from Power BI, actually allows me to sort of go and augment what I actually built in Excel. The really, really cool thing here is that I can come and take something like this and say, hey, you know what, let's go pin this one again to our Calgary UG. And now I can go to my dashboard, and you can see that we've actually got both components. If somebody goes and clicks on this guy here, it's going to take them back to the Excel workbook. So I'm obviously going to be sharing my dashboards, and now they can actually see this stuff. But again, just like your regular usage of what you're working with sharing Power BI reports, this thing is not going to let them download the original file and whatnot. So you've got a more secure sharing place where you're not leaking out that data. And of course, if I've shared it with somebody and I need to revoke access from them, I can just pull back the dashboard and they don't actually have access to it anymore. So it's much safer. I will say on this one here that I find that as I'm playing around with this, sometimes it does take a little bit of extra time to go into its load. The other interesting thing around this too, of course, is that if I want to actually make changes and I've got rights, I can go edit in Excel online, and I can actually go right back to the original workbook itself, and I can actually start playing around with this and making edits right here, and those will right back into the file that's stored on SharePoint as well. So it's a whole bunch of sort of goodness around this kind of component. And finally, of course, we don't want to forget about this little option as well, is if I go and take a look at what I actually have on my report here, I believe under, let's see, I got to figure out where the heck they moved this one to now, but there is an ability in this one somewhere to go and figure out, there's my Analyze in Excel, where we can actually go and create a pivot table. Yeah, I've already installed these updates, thank you. We can actually go and create a pivot table that actually reads directly from that data model. So here we go, we're opening up a new workbook. Enable editing, please. And at this point, I should be able to go and actually start building a pivot table against the exact data model. And that's fun. Enable content, please. Love it. How many windows do you have to clear, right? And come on, give me what I need. There we go. All models here. The only problem is, of course, for an end user, if you need to enrich this and add something else to it, another table that needs to be linked in there, you can't do that, which is actually one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of Analyze in Excel. But cool thing, if I want to do some more work on it, I can definitely do that. I can go and take a look at my months, my sales, my budgets, and do whatever I want to do. So it's kind of the full circle solution for what we're actually dealing with when we looked at this thing. All of this has been built in Excel, modeled in Excel, enriched in Excel, published to Power BI, can be shared in Power BI. Never once did I open Power BI Desktop to get this done. So what I want to do is I want to sort of circle back on this thing here, and I want to throw this up here. These tools are not here to compete. They're here to complement each other. And this is, again, one of the things that I really, really want to be really clear on this is if somebody comes to you and says that you need to replace your Excel with Power BI, you really need to question whether or not that's actually the truth. Can you build it in Excel and then publish to Power BI? Is it a better tool for the better job? Again, what I just did, I would not want to try and actually do that kind of modeling in Power BI. Yes, you can, but it's going to be much harder. So why not use the better tool for that particular job? On the other hand, if I'm trying to use some of Power BI's other things, I'm just building a dashboard, I'm going to go to Power BI. It looks much sexier. There's a whole bunch of real goodness in there. If I need to get to DAX formulas that don't exist in Excel, I'm going to go to Power BI. If I need row-level security, or if I need many-to-many joins or one-to-one joins for things, I'm going to go to Power BI because Excel doesn't have them. The right tool for the right job. So that's sort of the thing that I want you to really think about and challenge here is that you can actually do an awful lot with Excel. So let's take a look and round this one out and just sort of finish this off. Most people know, I think, if you've been working with these tools, that you can build a model in Excel or you can build a model in Power BI Desktop. And if you build a model in Excel, you can import it to Power BI Desktop before you publish it. And you can build your reports, build your dashboards, and share. This is kind of the normal flow that most people are exposed to. What I just pushed out to you is that you can also upload your workbook into Excel Online, pin that to a dashboard, share that with your users. Or alternately, you can build your model in Excel, you can export it, publish it directly over to Power BI, and you can build all of your Power BI reports online because the data model is the same thing as what you would get if you publish from Power BI Desktop. You can even go and use Analyze in Excel. All of this functionality is available to you whether you start in Excel or whether you start in Power BI Desktop. That's pretty darn awesome. One thing I will sort of point out with this is around the scheduled refresh capabilities here. I recommend that you do a manual refresh on your Excel Online. You can schedule a refresh, but I haven't found it always necessarily to be the most stable. The idea is that if your file is stored in a SharePoint Online, that it should be able to refresh even the Power Queries inside it to drive its data model. I would definitely, before relying on it, test. I have a nice example where it's actually worked fairly well, except that it throws me an error flag all the time, even though it updates. So that's kind of a weird one. As far as the bottom half of this, though, publishing, I've got workbooks that I can schedule a refresh on these, and they've been refreshing for months with no errors whatsoever. They have never touched Power BI Desktop, and the full scheduled refresh works. You just need to validate that your data source is going to work correctly. If it's coming from SQL Server, no problem. If it's coming from SharePoint and it's a collection of files, I'd be watching that one a little bit more closely. So just kind of think about those components when you go through. Test before you rely on it. But ultimately, some pretty good stuff here. If you're looking at just taking that Excel file that you have and sharing it with someone, this is a fantastic solution to make it work for you. So the big question then comes down to which tool to use and when. So I have a little matrix that I sort of go through, and this is my philosophy, and I want to be really clear on this. This is my philosophy. You can challenge this, you can argue this, you can, maybe even be right on some of these things as well, but this is my observations here. If I'm building a prototype of business intelligence, this is where Excel and Power BI are awesome. When we start looking at trying to answer the boss's question for that harebrained question that nobody ever should have had to ask, Excel and Power BI are great tools for actually going to figure out whether or not it works. Now, the way that I tend to use Power BI in this, and what I encourage a lot of people to do when I train is, look, if the boss asks a question, you go and you try and build it in Excel first. You model it. You finally figure out, because let's face it, 80% of what the boss asks you for, they didn't actually need anyway. But the 20%, that 20% becomes gold. And when you actually nail down what the 20% actually is, and you go to IT with that and say, listen, I've built this model and I'm having some problems with it. It's mission critical. My boss needs it refreshed every day and I've got all these challenges with it. Can you help me out? At that point, IT goes, wait, did you say mission critical? Wow, we need to help you. And it's a totally different conversation than when you approach them over that harebrained model that your boss needs that everybody knows isn't going to actually have any value in it. So both these tools are great for prototyping. Use whichever one you like. Just say, I'll prototype oftentimes in Excel because I find that I like it for doing my data analysis. Structured tabular analysis can be done in either tool. We've got Power Query, we've got the data model in both tools. Unstructured ad hoc analysis, much easier to do in Excel than it is in Power BI. Power BI kind of obviously constrains you based on the data formats to be in a rectangular format, in that tabular format a lot of times. Can you work around it? Yes, but it's a little bit more difficult. Excel really allows you to go to town and do anything you want. Of course, this is also one of the things that IT hates about it because it's a little bit unpredictable. As far as deep data analysis goes, I know that people will argue this one with me, but I actually find it much easier to do deep data analysis inside Excel because I find that this takes a lot of iterations. I can drill into a pivot table. I can keep on going down, adding formulas or different components to that pivot table, switching it up in different ways, drilling down to different levels, a lot easier than I can with the matrix in Power BI, mainly because of the space constraints that you have for one page. Now, having said that, I've just talked about some of the good stuff in Excel, but let's talk about Power BI. The variety of visuals in Power BI knocks Excel out of the park. I wish we had half of the visuals that Power BI has in Excel. That'd be great. Cross-filtering of visuals in Power BI is awesome. I would die for that in Excel. What we have in Excel, slicers, timelines, and they only work really with pivot charts and pivot tables. That's a pretty limited stack when you compare to what you have in the Power BI tool. So for that side, look, man, reporting, Power BI knocks it out of the park. Drill down capability, you know what? The Excel side, you have the ability to drill down in a pivot table. In Power BI, you've got the ability to drill down in almost any visual. I wish we had that in Excel as well. So that's a really, really cool thing to have. The next one, again, could potentially be a little bit controversial, and that is the suitability for multi-page single sheet reports. Your pivot table let's think of a general ledger listing, can flow over 50 pages. People trying to do that in Power BI, it's a very poor experience. I see people saying, look, I want to port all of my financial statements to Power BI. It's the wrong tool. You can't look at these things in Power BI. In Excel, it works great, but you can still share it in Power BI using the Excel workbook. So think about those. Now, there is paginated reports for different things. The only problem with that, new app, new skill set, so more training along the way. So, but it is possible today in Power BI. It wasn't about, a year ago. Sharing control in Excel is obviously poor. Power BI is excellent. The security in Excel, it's mediocre, but I can hack anything you throw at me. So, again, Power BI is a much stronger scenario for those areas. So the big lesson in this one here is don't be talked out of it just because it's Excel. Use the right tool for the right job. A lot of these problems around the Wild Wild West have been solved by coupling these two products together. Now, I'm going to throw up my last slide here, which is how to connect with me. And then, we're obviously open for questions, challenging any of the stuff that we have in this area here. If you want to follow what I'm doing, you can get me at all of these locations. My social media is down the bottom. If you're interested in monkey tools for Excel, you can see that at the top right-hand corner at excelguru.ca/monkeytools. And if you're interested in our Excel and Power BI training, you can check us out at skillwave.training. I see we've got a couple of hands raised here, so I don't know how you guys like to do this. If you want to come off mute, or Renata, if you want to MC it.
Yeah, I can maybe direct just the order. Thank you so much, Ken. That was a brilliant presentation, and we'll maybe have Roger start off with his question.
Hello, just had a quick question about the privacy level settings. So if you applied those on your data model, would they flow through to Excel, preventing it from leaking, as you were mentioning earlier?
When you're talking privacy, are you talking about hiding columns in the data model, or are you talking about Power Query's privacy constraints?
Power Query or Power BI's privacy query, setting it to organizational or...
Okay, so basically the privacy level should inherit going across for those kind of things. The big key thing, of course, is when you're working with Power BI, you cannot disable your privacy settings like you can in Power BI Desktop or in the Excel Desktop. So you just got to make that, you just got to keep that in mind. But yeah, as long as you set it, the Power Query or the privacy level should go with a Power Query, and that is app irrelevant. Whether you use Excel or Power BI, it's the same tool. So it should be fine. I just do want to throw out, because the other side of that is around doing things like hiding columns in the data model and things like that. Those also get published as well. So you'd see that even if you tried to actually go and interrogate certain things, you would not necessarily see the or you shouldn't see the columns that I actually hid in the data model. They won't be there. So just like you would expect with working with Power BI Desktop as well there as well. So.
Awesome. So our next question would be from Jared.
Hey, Ken, thanks so much for that talk. The big thing that I wanted to know about is from more of a technical standpoint, I found that Excel is a little fragile to extract data out of on more enterprise tools. So using SSIS or other tools to get that data into, say, a SQL server. The accountants that I work with are always trying to do their budgeting and forecasting in Excel, and then and I don't fault them for that in any way. But whenever I try and get that data into more enterprise grade tools, it always ends up being a little bit of a fragile solution. Do you have any better ways around that?
So okay, yeah. So let me just throw this one back at you for a second here, and I just want to go and open up the original file here, because there is something that I have done here which very, very, very much violates best practice in the grand scheme of things, right? So I want this one here, and of course I got two workbooks with the same name right now. So let me just close that and reopen it. So the thing that I've done that actually violates best practices in this case here is I've actually got, oh, for crying out loud, don't be like that. All right, fine. You know what? We'll just go with a catch-up one. That'll work. So basically, the thing that I've done that violates best practices is this data is in the same file as the data model that I've built. Ideally, I shouldn't be doing that, right? I should actually kick off a new workbook. Whether I'm the accountant, whether I'm the IT person, really doesn't matter here. So if I'm pulling data from SQL Server and I'm the accountant, what I should be doing is I should be saying, okay, let me go and use Power Query to go and get the data from the SQL Server, bring it down here. I might have to land some stuff. I might have to append it into the data model and whatnot and publish that. If I need to give it to you because you're taking that and now saying, hey, I want to upload this back into the SQL Server using my tools, what I would actually suggest is that these guys should probably be creating one table that has your output for you. And at that point in time, you should be using to connect to that workbook so that there's minimal changes that you need to do. If that doesn't work because SSIS doesn't like talking to a file that has those kind of things, what I would do is I would either do just a copy paste values, or I would do a routine to extract that. But my expectation is that you shouldn't have problems with SSIS, because you can actually run M packages right inside SSIS now. So you should be able to actually script up a package that says, connect to that one worksheet that has the output format that I'm looking at and pull that data in. And it should be good to go. Are you seeing different issues with like bigger problems, or is it just that their format still is not really conducive to the tabular format that you need?
So the big one that I had last time was we had order numbers in one column that was supposed to be a text field, and SSIS has a tendency to default those values to a number field. It samples, I believe it was the first dozen or so columns, and then assumes data types on me, and then.
I gotta tell you, that just makes me laugh, because usually that's Excel getting blamed for that problem, because Excel does the exact same thing. It infers a numeric data type where it's actually text-based. So I would actually look at your Power Query for SSIS, because now I'm sure you've got other tools inside SSIS to do this. I've never worked with SSIS, okay? But you can run a Power Query package, and in Power Query you can basically say, read the data from the Excel file, set that first column to be text, which is exactly what we do with Excel when we're bringing the data over into Excel to force it to be text before landing it to the worksheet so that we don't get that problem. So I think the tool's there. It just needs to probably be manipulated in order to do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
No worries.
Are there any other questions for Ken? Christian?
Hi, Ken.
Hey, Christian. How you doing, buddy?
Well, just wanted to make sure I understood correctly something. When you are sharing the Excel file from Power BI, the guy that gets the share needs to have the Power BI Pro license, right?
He will, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a Power BI thing, right? I mean, as soon as you share from Power BI, both the author and the consumer need the Power BI Pro license. That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, either Pro, or if you have Premium, no problem.
I believe that's the case, although not having a premium license, I can't say that I've actually tested that. But that is my understanding, yeah. So, the whole longer term with all of this stuff here, of course, is that organizations are going to move to something that has a Power BI Pro license across the board. For small businesses, I know that that's a little bit of a tall ask, because it's an extra $10, $15 a month, whatever it is that goes on these things. But, at the end of the day, if you look at it and go, is that cheap insurance versus having your data leak out? Maybe it is, right? So it's something to think about. But yeah, that Power BI Pro license is definitely going to be a concern in that regard.
And